Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Brief. The Trump administration's actions against globalization have left former U.S. President Bill Clinton, a Democrat, feeling quite helpless. He said that nowadays, very few people clearly think about the benefits of globalization. Washington Post columnist David Ignatius, through an exclusive interview with Clinton, looks back at the globalization initiatives Clinton promoted during his presidency in a new book. On September 6, the Washington Post published an excerpt from Ignatius's new book. In Ignatius's view, no American has laid more groundwork for 21st century globalization than Clinton. As the 42nd President of the United States, and as the leader of the world's largest economy and its only superpower at the time, Clinton led a historic effort. The North American Free Trade Agreement was passed in Congress, and he celebrated China's accession to the World Trade Organization. Clinton probably said this himself. Over his 8 years in office, he completed nearly 300 trade agreements. Nowadays, neither party in the U.S. is interested in replicating this record. Ignatius points out in his book that more than 20 years later, the shine of that era has faded, and Clinton's role as a leading figure in global integration is no longer seen as an unqualified success. The so-called progressive wing of the left-leaning Democratic Party does not endorse Clinton's brand of market-oriented economics. The most recent Democratic president, Biden, has dismissed Clinton-style trade agreements and instead chosen to promote domestic manufacturing. On the other hand, conservatives criticize Clinton's China policy as being too naive. Domestically, Clinton candidly admitted to Ignatius that things did not turn out as he had expected. He said that American leaders failed to deliver on their promises amid the wave of globalization. He said that Americans failed to provide enough support, and also underestimated the growing discontent among the working class, especially those dissatisfied with his trade policies. The so-called Rust Belt voters were a key factor in Hillary's defeat in the 2016 presidential election. He said part of the problem was that the influence of the private sector had already surpassed that of the public sector. With capital becoming more mobile, it's become difficult for governments to raise enough funds by taxing corporations and the wealthy, which means they can't launch social welfare programs to ease workers' discontent. As for foreign policy, when asked about his expectations for China as it prepared to join the global trading system in the late 1990s, Clinton said he thought China would change as a result. He also said, "I also believe they would eventually overtake us to become the world's largest economy. My goal was to make sure that when that day came, it wouldn't be to our disadvantage, nor would it pose a danger to them." Back then, I was much more optimistic. In 2021, during Biden's administration, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the U.S. government had made a mistake in the past by believing it could fundamentally change China through American policy. However, that is not the goal of the Biden administration. He said the Biden administration's aim is to shape an environment that is more favorable to the U.S. and its allies, and an international environment that aligns with the interests and values of its partners. The goal is not to bring about fundamental change in China. In fact, China has always insisted on following the path of peaceful development. The various ups and downs in China-U.S. relations have been caused by the U.S. government abandoning its original engagement policy and shifting to a series of containment and suppression measures. Especially since the Trump administration took office, with the U.S. unilaterally imposing suppression and maximum pressure policies, tensions in China-U.S. relations have intensified, and the trend of deglobalization has become increasingly pronounced. In April last year, the Biden administration's trade representative openly described China's economy as a challenge for the U.S. and Europe. She said, "We see the challenges coming from China, and surviving in competition with such a highly efficient Chinese economy is tough. This is the challenge our companies are facing." But as the Chinese side has repeatedly emphasized, U.S. suppression and pressure cannot stop China from developing and growing stronger. On July 20th, Pulitzer Prize-winning Wall Street Journal China correspondent Andrew Brown pointed out on a podcast that in one field after another, China is either catching up with the U.S., running neck and neck with the U.S., or, in many cases, even pulling ahead. He emphasized this point. The U.S. has underestimated the character of the Chinese people and the strength of China's manufacturing industry. In reality, China's system operates extremely well. Some people have misjudged this in the past and blindly believed in the so-called China collapse theory. Brown said that China is extremely focused, and its system functions exceptionally well. In the past, some people misjudged this and thought that China's socialist market economy would collapse. China does indeed face challenges, but its capabilities are truly impressive. To sum up a few observations. During the middle of Clinton's presidency, there was a period when he wanted to let China join the WTO, but by the end of his second term, he was constantly blocking China's entry. It wasn't until 2001, when the Republican George W. Bush took office, that the U.S. attitude towards China became tougher. The turning point was the 9/11 attacks in 2001. Bush urgently needed China's support for America's war on terror, so he quickly approved China's entry. By the end of that year, China joined the World Trade Organization. So, during Clinton's second term, he did indeed push for this. With globalization, even high value-added industries in the U.S. were relocated overseas, including advanced chip manufacturing. Looking at America's development, this move brought significant risks. Manufacturing hollowed out, a large number of workers lost their jobs, and it directly led to the rise of populism within the U.S. Thirdly, Democratic politicians in the U.S. have long been hinting that after China's economic marketization, it did not move towards the Western-style electoral politics that America had imagined. By the time of the Biden era, the U.S. has been even more outspoken, saying it has already let go of peaceful evolution, treating China as an opponent. Whether or not this claim is true, one thing is certain: the U.S. does want to change China's political system and push it towards Western-style elections. If that were to happen, it would allow the U.S. to effectively manipulate China. But China's leaders, with their far-sighted vision, did not follow America's script. They insisted on taking a path with Chinese characteristics, which has led to today's China standing on equal footing with the U.S. Trump's trade policies also aim to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. from China in large numbers. However, a recent article from Politico pointed out that Trump's attempt to lure companies away from China actually backfired. So far, many American companies operating in China have not left. For these U.S. firms, facing Trump's unpredictable trade policies, keeping their business in China seems to be a better choice than moving it back to the U.S. 6 business leaders and commercial groups admitted in interviews that this is the option with the least risk. They said that Trump's comprehensive tariff hikes not only target China, but also most of the other major manufacturing countries in the world. What's more, Trump's future trade moves remain unpredictable. A survey published in July by the U.S.-China Business Council, USCBC, also reflected this point. The survey found that although the number of companies reconsidering their investment strategies has increased, about 2/3 of American companies operating in China plan to maintain their investments there. An American gaming company said there's no longer any room to wait and see, they can only pay the tariffs, but this has put their company in a difficult position. Another part of the challenge lies in how much of a price increase consumers are willing to tolerate. This kind of squeeze has brought a survival crisis to many small and medium-sized American retailers. While large retailers have the ability to negotiate lower prices with suppliers and absorb part of the tariff costs, this approach is unsustainable for more specialized companies. Many American companies that rely on Chinese goods hope that the trade situation will become clearer in the coming months. Type Road believes that although the U.S. and China have reached an agreement to temporarily halt additional tariffs, it is not. The 3 rounds of negotiations between the two sides this summer have made almost no progress. The U.S. government has also put pressure on other countries, demanding that they cut off transshipment channels for Chinese products, including imposing a 40% tariff on transshipped goods. In Trump's second term, the reciprocal tariffs implemented by the U.S. government have also affected manufacturing bases including Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia, bringing their tariff levels close to those of China. When Trump decided to raise tariffs to punish those who continue to buy after Russian oil and Indian companies, India is now also facing tariffs as high as 50%. Steve Lamar, president and CEO of the American Apparel and Amp Footwear Association, said that Trump frequently raises tariffs over non-trade disputes, and the endless negotiations between China and the U.S. have forced many companies that rely on Chinese components to choose to temporarily stay in China. No one wants to leave China, to avoid moving their industries to the wrong place. For companies that rely on China and its peripheral products, Trump's policies have dealt them an even heavier blow. James Yun, senior partner at a Shanghai supply chain consulting firm, said that the China Plus One strategy has already failed. American mid- and low-end companies either exit the market or go bankrupt, and American consumers are also starting to feel the impact. Retail giants like Target, Walmart, and Carter's disclosed in their second quarter financial reports that higher tariffs have increased their costs. For example, since April, the price of Barbie dolls has already risen by 42.93%. During investor meetings, these companies also mentioned that as key holiday shopping seasons approach, product prices are expected to keep rising. Some American companies that have no way to pass these costs on to consumers are already in trouble. since June. Since then, American home goods retailer At Home Group and toy and stationery supplier IG Design Group have both filed for bankruptcy, attributing their declining revenues to tariffs. They are not isolated cases. According to the former president of the U.S.-China Chamber of Commerce and partner at consulting firm Foresight Restructuring, Mr. Gibbs, in recent months, the number of bankruptcies among American companies that rely on Chinese suppliers has been increasing. The number of bankruptcies has surged exponentially, and their restructuring business orders are already fully booked. They point the finger at tariffs and uncertainty. According to the annual survey by the U.S.-China Business Council, although most American companies in China feel the pressure from tense U.S.-China relations, the vast majority still plan to expand their investment in China this year. On one hand, they want to continue seizing opportunities in the Chinese market. On the other hand, they also rely on their China operations to maintain global competitiveness. Information company analyst James Shin said that these industries won't return to the U.S. because the U.S. lacks the corresponding industrial ecosystem, labor force, tax incentives, or capital. This makes it economically unfeasible for companies to move out of China. To sum up simply, first, capital is sensitive and always moves towards profit. If Trump insists on going against this principle, companies would rather shut down than keep running a loss-making business. Second, the reality is that the U.S. simply doesn't have the conditions for manufacturing to return, or some American companies might leave China because of the increasingly tense U.S.-China political relations, but the problem is it's hard for them to move back to the U.S. The conclusion is that Trump's policy is more about boasting to win votes. It's easy to talk, but getting American companies to actually return is much harder.